So thank you all for coming to our conversation on housing. This is the first public meeting as we endeavor to prepare a housing production plan. Alexis is going to explain a little bit more about that, but I just want to thank you all for participating. Wherever you stand in housing, I think the big idea we want to come away from here is maybe if you're all set, someone else might not be, so kind of putting yourself in someone else's shoes and to figure out as a community how best to address community needs and the vision for the future. So thank you all, and in an interest of time, I'm going to turn it right on over to Alexis to get us going.
Had a great discussion last spring, I understand. And so we're, our goal is to be building on that as we move forward. So I just want to acknowledge that there's already been a ton of work and thought that's gone into this. Let's see what we're doing tonight. As you all came in, we have some boards for folks to take a look at. If you didn't get a chance to take a look on the way out, feel free to dot vote if Paige didn't give you the dots already. Tonight I'll give you a presentation that goes into some of the research we've been doing already, and then we're going to jump straight into a discussion. We want to, our goal for tonight is to really hear your thoughts and get a better understanding of what the folks in town's attitudes towards housing are tonight. So I'm excited to share with you the research that we've done, and then to hear from you on what you think. For those watching from home, we have an open house, an online open house available that is going to have the same materials that we're looking at tonight and the same questions for folks to answer. And if any of you all know people who might be interested but who weren't able to make it tonight, please recommend that they go to the website, because we'd like to hear from them as well. It's www.mapc.org/Foxborough-housing. The online survey will be up for another week. And we're really hoping we can hear from people who weren't able to make it tonight as well. So, all right. So, as Paige said, my name is Alexis Smith. I'm a senior planner with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, or MAPC, which is the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. We provide technical assistance to towns on a wide variety of subjects, including housing, which is why I'm here. And we're here at the town's invitation today. But we're not the only ones involved in this. We're working closely with town staff. There's also a project working group made up of town residents who are stewarding the process. Are folks here from the working group want to raise your hands? Great. Thanks to y'all for being here and for being part of it. We will also seek public input at key points from you all, from residents and stakeholders, and that's going to inform what the recommendations are and how we proceed with the plan. And ultimately, we'll be taking the plan to the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen for approval. So, what is a housing production plan? It is a state proactive strategy for communities to plan for and guide the development of housing. It's the key of what this is we want to be understanding what the town's housing needs are, identify goals to meet those needs, and then strategies that will help us achieve those goals. The state requires that certain things go into a housing production plan. I'll run through these. The first is an assessment of housing needs and demand. That's a lot of data analysis on what kind of housing is in town, who lives in town, what are their needs. We're going to be getting into a lot of that tonight. The second piece is looking at constraints. So like, for example, if a town has a ton of land in a flood zone, that's a constraint because we don't want to recommend anything be built in a flood zone. The third piece is the state requires that we look at specific sites that might be good opportunity areas for housing. It also requires that we set goals. Those are both a actual number goal of, okay, we think we need this much housing, and also more general goals like, okay, we want to recommend policies that will help seniors age in place. And then the last piece is strategies to achieve those goals. We don't want to just set high, lofty goals. We want to help the town identify ways to actually accomplish that. So the plan is going to deal with both market rate and affordable housing, so I'm just going to kind of get into some of the technical terms here. Housing is considered affordable when it costs 30% or less of a household's income. So the same house might be affordable to one family, but not to another. And anytime a family or household pays more than 30% of its income towards housing, that household is considered cost burdened. It means that, they might be not spending, might not have enough funds available to spend on other things like, healthcare or whatever the case may be. Housing can be what we call like a lowercase a affordable if it just is, regular old market rate housing, but it happens to be more naturally affordable because it's either a little bit older or a little bit smaller. We call that naturally affordable housing. But housing can also be like capital A affordable or deed restricted housing is the official term. That housing is specifically income restricted for folks who are low or moderate income. You have to earn below a certain amount to be eligible to move in there. There are deed restrictions that go along with the housing that preserve affordability in the long term. And this kind of housing is usually constructed with some sort of government subsidy or as a result of government regulations. This does not occur naturally as opposed to the, just kind of naturally smaller housing. And we'll be thinking about the need for both types as part of this plan. The way we determine who's eligible for affordable housing is based on what's called the area median income, or AMI. That's calculated by the federal government for the entire region, and Foxborough is part of the greater Boston region for that. And the greater Boston area median income for a family of 4 is $113,000. Pretty high. That's half the people in the Boston area make less than that, and half the families in the Boston area make more than that. That's smack dab in the middle. And households are considered low income typically if they make less than 80% of that area median income. And the income, it varies based on household size. So it's smaller for if you're a one-person household, then much larger if you're a 4 or 5 or 6-person household. And it's interesting. All of these income levels that you see up here. I don't know if you all can see it, but they're all considered low income. Low income can mean somebody who's earning minimum wage, or say a senior on a fixed income. That would be on the extremely low income end of the spectrum. But low income also typically encompasses folks like entry level teachers or firefighters, or maybe young professionals starting out who are just making a starting salary. And those folks often as well have a hard time finding affordable places to live. And so we want to be considering the needs of all of those people as we're talking about housing need in town. Housing production plans are tied to Chapter 40B, which a few of us were talking about earlier. Chapter 40B is a state regulation. Many of you are probably familiar with it already. It sets a goal that 10% of a town's housing stock be what it defines as affordable. And if it's not, then developers can come in under more flexible rules. Now, Foxborough has reached that 10% threshold. So cheers to Foxborough. That's great. It has safe harbor, and it has a little more local control over how it wants to see development happening. So, given that Foxborough has met that 10% goal, why do an HPP? Well, there's a couple of really good reasons aside from the state requirement. First, it's to identify housing need and address the need by setting goals. Even though 10% of the Foxborough's housing is on that state affordability list, that doesn't mean necessarily that the needs are being met. And so what we want to do is really dive into what are the needs, and let's think about what it means to meet those needs. It also really sets out goals in terms of what kind of development. It sends a clear message to developers. This is the sort of housing that the town wants to see and promote. This is the type and location. It helps get folks on the same page. That's one of the things that we're really excited about tonight is continuing this conversation on housing and really making sure that we're all aware of, what others' views are and kind of coming to some sort of consensus. And also to, maintain and stay above that 10%. As the situation changes in town, we want to make sure that Foxborough keeps its safe harbor and keeps its local protections under 40B. So the timeline for this project, and again, there's the town has already started hosting conversations in the spring. This is a continuation of that. We joined the MAPC joined the process in the fall, and we've been looking at data analysis, which we're going to be getting into in a moment. There's going to be many more opportunities for discussion in the winter and spring, and we will hopefully look forward to continuing the conversation with you there. And again, ultimately, we'll be seeking planning board and select board approval for a plan, and the plan will ultimately go to the state, which will also review and approve it. So that's the basic process. Again, we're just starting out, and we'll be coming back to you with recommendations in the future, but tonight we're really here to hear what you think about housing. So now I'm going to share some of the analysis that we've done already, this first piece of the research. I'm going to talk first about demographics, who lives in town. Some people say, like, oh, well, why are you talking about that when this is a housing plan? The reason is because it's people who live in the housing, and we want to understand who lives in town and their needs so that we understand what the housing needs are. So Foxborough, many of you probably know this already. Foxborough is about 17,500 people. It's grown roughly 3% since 2000, and is projected to continue growing at roughly the same rate. That's a little bit, not quite as strong a growth as we're seeing in the region overall. We're projecting 4.7% growth for the region, but that's a good, solid, steady growth. One really crucial piece of the population that I expect we'll be discussing tonight, and that we've already heard a lot about, is seniors. Seniors have unique housing needs, as you all know. They often have physical limitations that require more accessible housing, perhaps modifications, and many of them are also on a fixed income and may have struggles maintaining and affording housing. And so that's a population that we really want to be paying attention to. Currently, 17% of the Foxborough's population is seniors, and this is a little bit higher than the state overall, which has about 16% seniors. However, that percentage is expected to grow substantially in the coming years. Unsurprisingly, a lot of y'all have heard about the baby boomers aging. This is something that we're going to see play out in Foxborough and really throughout the region. Again, we're expecting the senior population to increase by 38%. That's high. That's a lot of growth in one age group. At the same time, we expect to see middle-aged adults grow very slightly. Young adults decrease a bit, and the number of kids decrease very, very slightly. These are projections. They may not play out exactly as we're expecting, but these are based on past trends and what we see happening in Foxborough now. So I think it's safe to assume that we're going to see the number of seniors living in Foxborough increase. School enrollment over the past couple of years, housing does have an impact on schools, or it can. We have seen the number of Foxborough school children decrease by about 6.5% in the past 5 or 6 years. Last time we mentioned this, folks had a question about how that implicates charter school students. This number doesn't include charter school students. The number of charter school students has actually increased a bit in this same period, but the number of charter school students is so small compared to the number of general students that the overall number of students still has decreased. Diversity, Foxborough is less diverse than the state overall. The overall state is 73% Caucasian as opposed to the town, which is 88% Caucasian. Let's see, income. Again, this is really important to understand because it dictates what kind of housing you can afford. Foxborough's median income is just over $98,000 a year, which is about $24,000 higher than the state average. But that doesn't tell the whole story. There's still folks who earn far less than that. 1/3 of the households in Foxborough are low income, and over half of seniors are low income. Again, that's pretty typical, given that many seniors are retired or are working fewer hours, but it's something to keep in mind when we're thinking about housing needs. Foxborough has a relatively high percentage of renters compared to the surrounding towns. 35% of households are renters. That's, I just want to highlight that because it's important to recognize that there are, a lot of different types of people with different housing situations in town. One really interesting piece of information that I was surprised by was that owner households in Foxborough earn just about double what renter households earn. Owners in Foxborough have a median income of $123,000, while renters in Foxborough have a median income of $62,000. So that's a pretty substantial difference in terms of what housing you can afford. Now we'll get into the housing stock. Unsurprisingly, housing costs have been increasing. I'm sure that will shock nobody. We've seen home costs for homes for sale going up quite a bit in the past couple of years. The average Foxborough household earning that $98,000 a year could not afford to purchase the average Foxborough home, which is today priced at $456,000. That means that a lot of people who live in town today could not afford to move here if they didn't live here already. Honestly, that's not an unusual thing. We see that that's pretty common in a lot of towns, but it's important to keep in mind. Rental costs are also increasing, not quite as steeply as ownership costs, but still quite a bit. Rental costs are a little bit more in line with Foxborough's median income. An average Foxborough household, again, earning that $98,000 a year, could afford to pay the average Foxborough rent for a two-bedroom apartment, which is just like $2,400. But it's important also to keep in mind that given what we noted before, that the average Foxborough renter earns far less than that, there's a little bit of a mismatch there. As I mentioned before, any household that spends more than 30% of their income on housing is considered cost burdened. 46% of renters are cost burdened. Again, this isn't that surprising, given that many of them many renter households earn substantially less. A lot of senior households are cost burdened as well. But owner households don't escape either. 22% of owner households are cost burdened. So it's something that affects everyone in town. The age of Foxborough's housing. Foxborough, even though it seems like a lot of a lot has been built recently, actually Foxborough has built less housing in the past 20 years than in many of the decades prior. And an interesting thing to pay attention to, especially given the anticipated growth in the senior population, is the number of older homes. A third of Foxborough's homes were built before 1960. This means that they may not be as energy efficient as newer homes, which could mean higher utility bills and more difficult to maintain. And it also means that they may not be accessible. Bedrooms or bathrooms on an upper story, smaller doorways might need more retrofits in order for a senior to be able to stay in their home. The types of housing in Foxborough. We look at this because different types of families need different types of housing. You all probably won't be surprised, a majority of housing in Foxborough is single family, and that's most of what's being built recently, but there is also a fair number of multifamily structures as well. Looking at affordability, as I mentioned before when we talked about the 40B, 12.5% of Foxborough's housing stock is considered affordable, which is great. Foxborough has met the state goal and has safe harbor. But someone was saying before that 12.5%, or those 859 units, aren't necessarily affordable to everybody. So that's something important to keep in mind. And that is still, those 859 units are still less than half the number of low-income families that currently live in Foxborough. There are currently 2,180 low-income families in Foxborough. So again, just something to keep in mind when we're thinking about housing need. So that was a lot of information to digest. We are going to split up into smaller groups and process that a little bit, and then kind of discuss the implications, and then again just hear from you on what you think about housing in town and what your goals are. The facilitators, if you could raise your hands. All over here. Okay, great. So we're going to be splitting up into small groups. You can find a facilitator. We'll do introductions, and then the facilitators will lead you into the questions. You all should have some worksheets that will guide you through some of the questions. And then at the end of the evening, we'll come back together and do a brief report back on some of the themes of the discussion we heard. I would just like to ask that everyone, as ground rules, be respectful. We all have valid opinions, and also please try to not monopolize the discussion. If you've been holding the conch shell for quite a while, then maybe step back. We want to make sure to really get a chance to hear what everybody thinks.
Okay, so we have about 8 or 9 minutes to get to the time. So I'm going to start off by talking about our group. We were a little off the reservation sometimes, I admit. So I'm just going to whip through some of what we said. But we noted limited downsizing options, limited multi-generational options. My group liked the concept of smaller homes around a common space. Again, smaller homes with less maintenance. Those were sort of the things. One thing that came up was creative suburban solutions to senior housing. Sort of one of the members pointed out that, like, there's Dorchester, there's the city, and that's not necessarily what Foxborough is trying to achieve. So we need to try to achieve some additional solutions, but maybe keep it in the context of the suburbs. Foxborough residents value open space and greenery. That's a lot of people said they moved to this town because of the beautiful setting. But then there was a note of, somebody said, we need density. So there's that balance between open space, greenery, and density. So there's our problem. Concerns. This is about any future housing. Lots of green and open space. They want tiny housing for seniors. And when they say tiny, they mean like 8 to 1,200. And actually, we have ended up realizing it's more like 1,200 to like 2,000. Sort of that size, but everybody has a different story. We also got to, I don't know if we got to, on the next page, we started talking about it would be nice to have the ability to have housing options in place. Like you might start at a single family, 1,800 square foot house in the community, and then you're able to move over to a smaller one, and then you might end up in a garden style apartment, and when you don't want to take care of a lot of property. So. There was a note that there's not enough smaller, modern, updated housing. Yes, there are a lot of small homes in this town. They were built, post-war, capes, ranches. But a lot of those are older and dealing with the maintenance issues and sort of the lots and stuff. So that was a concern mentioned. Large lot zoning, that's a concern. And then we noted that town meeting makes it very difficult. If we come up with all these great solutions, we need a 2/3 vote at town meeting. That means for every yes vote, every no vote, you need 2 yeses. So that's a big challenge in the state and here in Foxborough. So we might come up with some great solutions here, but there's a lot of other people in town that vote that might not be paying attention. So that's what we were sort of saying. This will be a true conversation where we need to get the word out as we evolve, and we're not there yet. And then someone noticed Cannon Forge. They just thought that concept really worked well, that it's open space, the housing clustered, the sizes, and they liked the idea of the different housing choices in the community. So it's ours. Sure. Allie.
Hi, I'm Allie. So I'm just going to go concerns because there's other facilitators. So I just some quotes. Other than I said, what are some concerns about the housing in Foxborough? And someone says, other than the fact that I can't afford it. So that was kind of an eye opener. And then somebody said that 30% is the acceptable rate, and they're not comfortable with that. Like, why is it 30%? Somebody else said that the young seniors are not being considered. When we think elderly, we think elderly, old and frail, but what about the young seniors? And they felt that there's not housing that addresses them. Like, they don't want to live in elderly housing. They're financially okay, but there's just not enough options for the young seniors. What else? Downsizing, there's not a lot of places to downsize, and the places that are available, they're expensive. And sorry, I can't read my handwriting, you guys. And then the infrastructure, they said that build infrastructure, it'll attract new people, and that people want to stay local after they travel all week for work. They don't want to have to travel again to, you know, to hang out, or, you know, they want to be able to walk down the street and have a cup of coffee or attend a show or whatever. So build that, and then it'll bring more people into Foxborough, and we'll get a pretty good balance of seniors and younger people. That's all I have as far as concerns. And, oh, I do want to point out that when someone said, what do you like living in Foxborough, this kind of warmed my heart. Sense of community, two or three people said sense of community, and then schools, and that the family's still here, and then my roots are here. So I love that. I just wanted to share that with everybody.
I'm going to stand up here. Make it easier on your necks. All right, so in my group we had, you know, really the idea that people like Foxborough the way it is. They like the character of Foxborough. They like the makeup of the residents according to by age, by demographic. There was concerns about the decrease in student population, being that if that continues to drop, then the makeup, the character of the town may change over that time frame. There was a concern that the number of apartments and some of these larger single-family houses aren't allowing or bringing people in for long-term residency. That people that are coming into apartments, they may be coming in and they're short-term renters. They're not here to stay. That's part of that character. They like that people, when the people that are here have been here. We had people ranging from, you know, 4 years to 50+ years living in Foxborough. So they like that people come here and they stay here. So they're looking for, you know, a range of different types of houses. Something that people can move as they grow in Foxborough, from single, young married couple to, you know, 90 years old, that they can move within Foxborough and stay within Foxborough. Also that some single family houses that are single levels, so that somebody who wants one floor living can get into one floor living, but in their own residence, in their own house. Multi-generational housing, so somebody that has, you know, grew up with their parents, they've, you know, as their parents age, they want to live in the same house as their kids and their grandkids, that can be an option, whether it's through an in-law apartment or a duplex that the one family can own and afford to own for that one family. And then the one last thing is that housing that fits in the neighborhoods. So there's a lot of different types of neighborhoods in Foxborough, so it's making sure that the houses that are being built or the houses that are getting knocked down and rebuilt kind of fit the character of that neighborhood.
Okay, I had the honor of facilitating Group 1, and there's an amazing group of people here in the room, and not having heard the rest of your discussions, I have to say that Group 1 was absolutely the best. So the first question was, what did you find interesting and surprising in the presentation? And a couple of things were the senior population growth that really struck a number of people, and the change in the cost versus the funds to be able to live in your current housing situation or housing unit. It came up multiple times in our discussion about people's want to grow old in Foxborough. And another thing that was surprising as well as interesting was the 38% senior citizen population growth. Another thing that was surprising to many in Group 1 was the number of renters and rental units increasing, how much it's increasing. Another concern that came up was the unaffordability of affordable housing. And so we talked a little bit about the definition as it was presented, which was really enlightening, but our group had some discussion on that. One thing that was also interesting was how pleased some of our folks are with the value of the town for all that's included. And that involved many things that crossed demographics and many age groups. And it was summarized as the bang for your buck for what you get in Foxborough. And a concern I guess that came up early was the change of scale in housing, the McMansions. So that was characterized as small homes being torn down as land was subdivided and 2 McMansions were going up. So that kind of carried through for a little bit. And included in that was losing the smaller homes and affordable housing. And some areas that are developed with large homes that could possibly have been developed with multifamily homes. And we talk about that later, about some of those opportunities. Two things that were pointed out that may have been missing from the exercise that may be in a future exercise in the part that had the, pick your group of the 4 or 5 groups. There was a senior person, but there wasn't a senior couple, so that could be incorporated, and then multifamily homes to own versus just to rent in. Goals that this group discussed at length were people who own mortgage-free dwellings that want to move to smaller places and become closer to people and a community within a community. And this was characterized, by Evie, who started this conversation, who said, "I'm an 82-year-old millennial," and that actually evolved into a great discussion in the group, which was, what we need is something that serves both end of the age spectrum. So our group was from someone who lived in the town of Foxborough for 4 years up to Gordon, who's been here for 87 years. And serving both ends of that spectrum, from the very young to the more senior, have a lot of the same needs. The proximity to transportation, proximity to resources, walkability, amenities, transit-oriented housing, proximity or at least transportation to shopping, and a goal that this group identified was the variety of housing sizes, as well as over 55 affordable housing, and possibly on town-owned land that also has taxpayers. So owned units on town-owned land, so we're not losing the tax base. That raised a concern within the goals, which was, I want to, one of our group members wanted to maintain or increase the value of the schools and the services here in town, which actually turned into a great conversation that, how diverse our population is and our needs are much more diverse than we may think, and that we may have solutions that can solve a lot of these different concerns that were raised or goals that were set. Some of the concerns, yes, am I out of time? Yeah. Read the rest.
So I will go really fast with our group 4. So during the housing adventure, we talked about seniors' access to housing that with limited maintenance and the ability to not make repairs because of physical limitations, but also young professionals with access to transportation, not needing a vehicle. And then that reoccurring theme kept coming up of near a job, less than 20 minutes or 20 miles, but seniors staying in their homes with less expensive home to live in than to move. If seniors had options, homes could go on the market, but seniors looking to live in villages or cluster homes, and possibly with that being Walnut Street. And then talked about housing and a great school system. Thank you so much. With the commuter rail, could be higher density or higher concentration housing options with affordable options. And then we talked about concerns, talking about increasing housing would have increase on the operations of the town and how much can the town afford. But then we also talked about Willows, the option that Willows has in Mansfield, where you move in, seniors can move in, and then as they progress through their age and need to get access to higher care, they can get that in one unit. But then we also talked about concerns of land availability with creative engineering and not enough frontage. And very end, we talked about more about the Willows models, but then talked about town-owned parcels, very similar to the last group, town-owned parcels that should be used for senior housing, and then talked about the access to senior housing because, and this is a weird way to say it, but concern that seniors are living longer, which means less turnover for senior options. So that's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Paige, I don't know if you have any closing words?
No, I am so appreciative that you all came, and I hope you come back. And please fill out our exit survey.
If you're interested in staying involved, please leave your email on one of the sign-in sheets on the way out. Yes, we will only use it to notify you when there's new events coming up. And again, just thank you all. Your input is really, really valuable, and we appreciate you being here tonight. So thanks.
Ask your friends and neighbors to go online and do the. Yes. Thank you, everyone.